All right. Wow. So first talk at the very first Seattle React Meetup. That's cool. And what better topic for a talk than Ember.js? No, but seriously, just out of curiosity, how many people here have heard about, used Ember.js? So actually, it looks like almost everybody. So that's good. So it'll be pretty. People know what I'm talking about.
You should ask who went to your past photo.
Yeah, I mean, I gave, as a full disclaimer, I'm actually a co-organizer of the Ember.js meetup. So I don't know who came to the meetup I did on a similar topic a couple weeks ago. Okay, not very many people, so it should be fresh content. And so I'm going to talk about a little pet project we've put together that we use in our app, and it's called Ember-React. And I'm also just going to kind of talk at a high level, just kind of a high level, how and why we're moving more and more of our application code from Ember.js to React. And just a little background about me. My name is Gordon Hempton. I work at a small startup located in Fremont called Outreach. The website's outreach.io. And we build, just a little on that, we build sales automation software. So we have a really slick client-sided app. It's kind of like a sophisticated inbox that salespeople use. It gives them a lot of cool features. And it's all written in Ember.js. And we've been using Ember for a long time as a team. I'm also the author of a couple Ember open source projects, namely EmberScript and EPF. EmberScript is a variant of JavaScript that is Ember specific, and EPF is a persistence framework, which is an alternative to Ember data. And this is actually a picture of an Ember router, just a big one. We've used Ember for a long time, and we've built pretty big Ember applications. We solved a lot of problems with Ember in a lot of different ways. I just want to start by asking, what is Ember? Ember's a lot of things. There's views, controllers, components, templates, routes, models, container. There's a dependency injection. There's bindings and observers. And I think most importantly, Ember has some really solid conventions. It has some conventions that people use, and a lot of people build their apps in the same way. What is React? React is components. There's something that looks kind of like templating called JSX. And I'm calling this a runtime, but I'm just talking about some intangibles here, like the shadow DOM and just managing components. So really, using these together, two frameworks, is that sane? Really though, just from a size perspective, Ember and its dependencies are, pushing 800 kilobytes plus. Putting React on top of that is actually not as crazy as it sounds. And we actually do it, and it works well for us. But I think that leads to the main question, which is why switch to React? We already have a fairly big and complex Ember.js application. And here I am at the React meetup giving a talk on using React inside of Ember. What prompted this? Just for some context, I think this is probably the worst performance comparison ever. I don't know how many people have seen this, but it's one of those performance comparisons between all the different JavaScript frameworks that floats around the web. It's a JS fiddle. I can actually show it. And it just kind of, you use these different frameworks, and it animates these spinning circles and shows the performance of that. There's Backbone, there's Ember and HTML bars, there's React. Well, apparently React doesn't even work. I don't actually know what's going on here. Yeah, it's moving too fast, faster than the refresh rate. But it used to show up some spinning balls there. But at the end of the day, it actually showed, when you did this, React was slower than some of the others. But for us, and this is kind of a little joke, but this is one of the core Ember.js members, and he's just saying that Ember.js will be the #1 JS framework for spinning circles. But for us, that is not our problem. For us, it's not animation. It's not reacting to changes. It's the initial render. Ember is really good at dealing with changes. It's heavily optimized for that case, but it's not heavily optimized for initially rendering a page or just big rendering changes in general. So I'm gonna show our app actually, just to kind of give a demonstration of what I'm talking about. Hopefully the internet works. So this is our app. This is a big Ember app. And this is, we have a lot of CRM-like functionality. So this is actually just an index page for one of our models. And as you can see, it's a pretty complex index page. For every item, there's this histogram, there's lots of different pieces of information, there are tags that show up, lots of nested collections. And this is what our app needs, and this is what our users want. And when we paginate, it's fairly fast. Especially when you take the server out and it's cached. So it's performant, but when I said that this was an Ember app right here, it's really not, in the sense that we had to heavily hand optimize this. Like, this is not idiomatic Ember code. This is us basically taking over all of the rendering and doing it by hand. Kind of, in a sense, to make this page performant using Ember, we had to revert back to precisely the type of code we wanted to escape by using one of these JavaScript MVC frameworks. So it's not pretty for us to make pages like that and have them be performant. And this is, nobody here uses Ember, so this is just some solutions inside of Ember to get around this. But a lot of these solutions are clumsy and they have a lot of constraints, which are annoying to work with. And for us, we wound up just using entirely custom rendering logic, which kind of defies the very purpose of a framework. What we really want is to not have to do performance optimizations, or if we do, it shouldn't be something we have to do on almost all of our index pages, all of the pages where we show lists. And we still, in the case where we do, we also still want to benefit from our framework choice. And I'm really lazy, so I like to reuse as much code as possible. It turns out, and so I wanted to come up with a better solution than what we had today, because it's a very big pain point in our application, and we had to interact with this code on a daily basis, and I didn't like it very much. So we explored a lot of different solutions, and it turns out React does a really good job at rendering pages like this. It's one of the fundamental principles of React is you can just re-render everything anytime you want. And when you do need to optimize, it's very incremental. There's a should component update method, which you can implement on a component to dictate when it renders. And in the Ember case, there's not a lot of ways to gracefully start to optimize things. It's almost, for us, it was very much an all or nothing type of affair. So we like this, and just to kind of benchmark this, and also just to use it inside of our application, we came up with something called Ember-React. And Ember-React is a small set of utilities to make using React inside of Ember a whole lot easier. And it works really well inside of existing Ember applications. So I'll give a demo of that. So this is actually an Ember app using Ember CLI. And it's a demonstration of using Ember-React. So, but what I want to focus on here are these index pages. So I have two index pages here. This is just contrived data. It doesn't even go to the server. This is just client-sided data. All the data is faked. And it's kind of similar to our app, except a lot less complicated. But I think it's more representative of what a real app might want. And in this case, we're rendering it using Ember. And so when I paginate here, this is all idiomatic Ember. When I paginate, it actually takes quite a while. It doesn't seem like a lot, but this isn't even touching the server. That's just pure render times. And that's actually pretty slow. And if you looked at our app, which I just showed you, that was a lot more complicated, and it took a lot longer to render. And this is also using a MacBook Pro, a modern computer on a desktop. It's still pretty slow. I mean, it's also hard to qualitatively demonstrate something up here, I mean, because I'm just doing the clicking. But if you type in Ember-React into Google, you can actually see this. But then when I go to the React index page, it's actually quite a bit more performant. And to me, what's more powerful than the performance is the fact that both of these index pages are idiomatic code. In React, I can use components with reckless abandon to my heart's content and still get relatively performant code over the same stuff in Ember. For instance, in React, we have some different components here. We have a gravatar component. We have a component that renders this time. We have components for these tags. And we do a similar thing in Ember. But at the end of the day, Ember's just too slow. It's prohibitively slow, and we have to do a lot of hand optimization. So that's Ember-React. And to get into a little bit of code, this is just a very simple React, trivial React component. Just renders that time ago you saw on the right-hand side of that page I just showed you. And with Ember-React, you can just drop this directly into your handlebars template. And moreover, that parameter there is bound. So if it updates in Ember world, it'll update in the React world. But that wasn't enough. We don't want just components in our app. It turns out React has a really nice router that's not baked into the framework. It's actually separate, but it's called React Router. And it's actually built by a couple of Ember.js dudes who are React or Ember converts. I think Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson. And they built a React router, which is very similar to Ember's router. So if you look at, these are actually React components which dictate the route structure. You can see, I mean, it's at the end of the day, semantically, it's very similar to Ember's router. And you can use this directly inside of your Ember routes, it turns out. So if you look back at that demo, some of these, so this index page, it's actually a React route. It's not just a component that we dropped into the page. It's actually the routing is done with React. I'm not going to dig a whole lot into code in this talk, but this is all up on GitHub if you want to dig a little deeper. But it just turns out that you can use React router inside of an Ember app, and it just works pretty well. So in your Ember route render function, there's a new hash property called React, and you can just pass in a React component to that. And you can even just do it directly in the router DSL. So some observations I've taken away from this little project is that Ember.js is really good at reacting to incremental change, whereas React is really good at rendering everything. And there's also a lot of opinions in the React ecosystem, particularly around immutability and state. And that kind of leads into why React is slightly awkward with complex models. When you're dealing with big models, like models that aren't just simple hashes, you have to do a lot of force updates and things like that in your code, which is a little unsightly, but it's not a big deal. And most importantly, Ember conventions can be used outside of Ember. We can emulate the exact same project structure of our Ember project in our React code. And at the end of the day, our app is similarly comprehensible. So when would we do this? Like, we investigated this originally because of performance. But really, I think there's some other benefits of using React inside of Ember. I think it is more composable, and there are some complex rendering situations where I think it works a lot more nicely. But also, I don't know if you guys have been following any news lately, but Ember 2.0 is coming out soon. And Ember 2.0 looks a lot like React in my mind. From the Ember 2.0 RFC, and they've said they've been heavily inspired by React, but they're going to adopt a virtual DOM. So they're going to have a virtual DOM now. And they're going to have a similar data flow between their components in Ember. And they also plan to map components to routes. So really, at the end of the day, Ember 2.0 is kind of eliminating some stuff from its framework. And if I take a step back and look at how we use React in our app, Ember aside, if this were just us starting from scratch with just React, we have a very similar stack. We have components. So if you look at the Ember 2.0, there's components, templates, routes, models, there's dependency injection, and some solid conventions. We have a very similar thing in our React stack where we have components, we have JSX, which is very close to templates. We have React Router, which is very similar to the Ember.js router. We have models, and we have a framework called coalesce.js, which is also on GitHub. That is kind of a spin-off of EPF. So it's very similar to Ember Data, but it's all ES6 based, and it's all pure JavaScript. And so we use that as our data layer, and that also integrates with Ember, by the way. We use that as our data layer, and then for dependency injection, we kind of loosely base it on React's context, and then we steal Ember's conventions. And at the end of the day, we have a stack today which looks very similar to what Ember 2.0 is promising in who knows when. And we're actually very happy with this React code that we're using inside of our app alongside of our Ember code. And as it goes, more and more of our app is becoming React instead of Ember. And the most noticeable difference is performance. But as developers, I think at the end of the day, it's a slightly better development experience. But I do think Ember 2 is going to be cool. So who knows in some time from now. Comparatively, some things that Ember does really well over React, it has a nice object model without the whole get set stuff. Whereas React has kind of a primitive, you create a class, you can't extend it, there's mix-ins, there's no super method. Ember has all that solved, and that's kind of nice. But I think as React evolves, they're decoupling everything and making it so you can use ES6 classes, et cetera, with React. And Ember has really well-defined conventions. And I think more importantly than just the conventions themselves, I think is the fact that Ember has a critical mass of a community around a particular set of conventions. I think Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale always say that Ember.js might not be the biggest framework, JavaScript MVC framework, but around a particular set of opinions and conventions, it probably is. Whereas in Angular and Backbone, a lot of people wired apps together in a lot of different ways. Ember CLI is really cool. I think it's nice to have a really solid build system around your app. And I think async is still a little bit awkward inside of React, whereas it's more first class in Ember, promises in particular. And so what about Flux? I haven't mentioned that at all. And based on my comparison diagram, Ember 2.0 is very similar to React without Flux. It turns out that for us, Flux isn't React first. You can use React without Flux. Flux is all about unidirectional data flow. It's very different from Ember, which has origins in two-way bindings. And at the end of the day, it's not really solving a problem for us. The constraints of unidirectional data flow aren't something that we're really trying to, that's not a problem we have. We were fine with Ember. Our problems didn't lie in how we structured our app. We're good at keeping our components small and keeping them not coupled to as little things as possible. That wasn't our problem. So for us, at least today, we're not Facebook scale yet, but we don't need this unidirectional data flow constraint, but that could change. And this is just another presentation that I think is really good about React versus Ember. It's kind of more high level. And yeah, that's it. So I don't know, questions or?
Yeah, do you want to take the questions? Anybody have any questions?
Sure, yeah.
If you're going to start a new project today, would you do everything in React or would you use Ember and React?
I think today I would use everything in React. For us, Ember-React was more of a measure because we already had a big Ember app. But I mean, that said, I'm very opinionated to have this weird set of technologies I'm tying together. I don't know if I'd tell you to go off and do that.
So I have a question, piggybacking off that. If you did everything in React, could you hook up, you said EPF, or what would your data structure be behind that?
Yeah, so I actually have a project called Coalesce, which is so this thing right here for our model layer, I had this project called EPF a while back, and that was kind of a response to what I thought were shortcomings in Ember data. And so I built this project, which solved a lot of the problems for us. But it's hard to compete with Ember data in the Ember world. So I ultimately changed it to be not Ember specific and renamed it coalesce.js. And that is a model layer that's actually very similar to Ember data. In my mind, I think it does things in a slightly better way, but I'm biased. And that functions as our data layer. And we could use that entirely independently of Ember. It would just be with React. So, yeah.
Any other questions? All right.
How do you test this hybrid?
So I mean, I think in today's world you need full integration tests. So we do. I'd say, to be honest, most of our testing is done through Capybara. So we have a full headless browser going through the motions. We do a lot of unit testing, but when a component has a lot of business-heavy logic, we normally extract that out of the component and then unit test that. When it's just presentation, we don't do a whole lot of unit testing on just presentation. But React does have the test add-on, so you can mount a component and test some things. But we actually don't do a whole lot of that yet. We do more of just unit testing, plain JavaScript, I would say.
Is one more on that? As you move more and more of your stuff out of Ember and into React, do you find there to be kind of an organizational challenge between individual components versus composite ones that are combinations of each other?
Yeah, a little bit. So we kind of closely follow the Ember conventions. So I think for the main organization of our app, there's a pretty conventional way to organize everything. I think what really breaks down is when you just have reusable components where you don't really know where they're going to be reused. We kind of just put those all at for instance, a special checkbox or something that you use throughout your app. We don't really have a strong convention around that, and neither does something like Ember. It's just a component. We just kind of have an ad hoc components tree of just all shared stuff.
All right. Well, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
So we'll take a few minutes and we'll let Brian get set up, and we'll have another talk in about 5 minutes. We're going to take a break, get another drink.